Both China and the United States need to avoid a new Cold War. China's State Councillor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi said this during his annual press conference on Sunday. He also warned against a political virus spreading in Washington, which is seizing every opportunity to smear China. So what has caused the spread of this virus, and what's at stake for ties between China and the West in general? Is there a way out? I'm pleased to be joined by journalist and scholar Martin Jacques, until recently a senior fellow at Cambridge University's Department of Politics and International Studies. He's also the author of When China Rules the World, The End of the Western World and the Birth of a New Global Order. Martin, it's good to have you with us once again. So is China-U.S. relationship at the lowest point already at this moment?
Well, it's certainly at the lowest point since 1978. You'd have to go back to the Cold War and America's backing of Taiwan as the real China to I think reference what's happening now. But certainly in the recent past, this is by far the worst moment.
Well, human history has gone through numerous pandemics, from the Black Death, smallpox, the flu in 1918 to more recently Ebola, MERS, SARS, but none of them seem to have been politicized as much as COVID-19 has. What do you think has driven this?
Well, I think that what happened was that COVID-19 became the stage, if you like, in which the underlying problem in the relationship between the United States and China was articulated. So COVID-19 was immediately part of that drama rather than causing that drama. It's just a new phase in it, and of course the result of it has been to worsen the relationship still further.
What China-U.S. ties have been rosier if it had not been, if COVID-19 ever emerged? What could have happened otherwise? Or is the virus simply the straw that broke the camel's back?
Well, I think that COVID-19 has just played a kind of, in a way, a walk on part in a longer term and overarching process, which is the deterioration in the relationship between the United States and China, which dates certainly from Trump's assumption of the presidency, or indeed Trump's election campaign in 2016. But there were already signs of this process before that as well.
In a previous interview, you made this comment on the Western view of the Chinese political system. You said, until quite recently, I think it was a no-brainer in the West. The Chinese political system had nothing to command. It was essentially illegitimate in the Western eyes, but there has been definitely a shift. The nature of that shift is that because of China's profound transformation, there is a kind of respect now, still a grudging respect, but nevertheless the beginning of respect, and I think it will continue. So you said that in 2017, if I'm correct. How does this level of respect stand now?
Well, I'm afraid the last sentence of what I said has not really been borne out, because it has that respect, that very limited and grudging respect has not continued, and now we're in, as far as the United States is concerned, full attack mode on China. I mean, basically, I look at it like this, that there was in the West, there was a relatively benign period between about 2000 and 2012, 2013, 14, something like that, when the West began to see China in a more benign way. And I think there were several reasons for this. There was people who were very impressed by China's economic growth. They were extremely impressed by the reduction in poverty, and they could see that China was becoming also an opportunity for Western economies. And that process, that atmosphere came to a juddering halt in 2016 and 2017. And although this kind of acceptance or acquiescence or grudging respect for China's political system, which had never really been clearly articulated, it was around the edges of this improvement in relations, it immediately was dissipated. And I think the key thing here is to remember that, in a way, China's governance system is a distillation of a fundamental difference between Western history, cultures, contemporary politics, and those of China. In other words, in some ways you could say, well, actually the governance system, it sums up the civilizational difference between the two. So it was always going to be a difficult path to traverse, because fundamentally, and we can see this very clearly now, the West has never accepted any form of modernity except Western modernity.
Yeah. Well, on the part of China, in the past few years, we were talking about concepts of a rising China, and China the new rising power, even power shifts from the West to the East. Well, all of these are arguable points for historians. It is visible that China has achieved a lot, as you just said. That has probably got on some people's nerves and led to comments like the wolf warrior diplomacy or diplomats. In your opinion, has China been too proud or too explicit, too assertive?
Well, I think that the underlying reason for the shift in the American attitude towards China was that the American assumptions that had underpinned the relatively stable and benign period of the relationship between the two countries from, let's say, around 1970 and the Mao-Nixon talks onwards until 2012, 2013, and so on, there were two fundamental assumptions. One, on the American side. One was that China would never be a serious economic threat to the United States. And secondly, as China modernized, it would increasingly westernize. And there was a realization in the latter stage of that period, growing recognition that actually both assumptions were wrong. China was becoming an very serious economic competitor to the United States, and furthermore, that there was no chance that China would adopt, for example, a Western-style political system. And so at that moment, I think there was a shift in American thinking, broadly speaking, to see China as a threat. That China, if this process continued, China would begin, as it were, to displace the United States' role.
Well, the U.S. has, some people in the United States actually have been trying to come up with a comprehensive strategy, and last November, the U.S. National Bureau of Asian Research published a report which is claiming to fill the vacuum of a clear and comprehensive strategy on getting tougher on China. So this report recommends a four-part strategy for defending U.S. prosperity and security by moving forward a posture of partial economic disengagement from China. Things like stop this tariff war but go more fundamental, and then restricting the flow of high technology but regulating the inflow of personnel capital into the United States, meanwhile improve on innovation in the United States itself. So Martin, how do you look at this kind of strategy vis-a-vis the decoupling that we have been hearing over the past couple of years?
I don't think we've just been hearing about it. I think it's exactly what's been happening on a range of fronts: trade, technology, personnel, and so on. And I anticipate that continuing. I mean, the latest raft of measures against firms like as in Taiwan, supplying semiconductor chips to Huawei, and which is going to be a big problem for Huawei. So I think this process, quite frankly, is going to continue. What we don't know is how far it's going to go. I mean, I think it would be extremely difficult to for them to create a situation like existed during the Cold War, because the Soviet Union was never part of the global economy, instead of the Western economy, and China is deeply integrated with it.
Right.
But I think this process is going to continue.
Finally, you wrote about when China rules the world. You updated this book, and now post-COVID, what is your assessment of the situation? Briefly, please. Do you think China is still going to rule the world? Do you think China has that intention and the ability at this moment?
Well, the title was tongue-in-cheek, to be honest with you, and it's based on an English expression which doesn't really translate into Chinese, because Chinese culture is different from Western culture. No country has ever ruled the world, no country, and no country ever will rule the world. My title was shorthand for the process by which China will become the most influential country in the world. And that is exactly what is happening, and has happened with a vengeance, really, since the book was published in 2009.
All right. We have to leave it there. Many thanks to Martin Jacques joining us from the UK. And with that, we come to the end of this edition of The Point with me, Li Xin. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with LA. Thanks for watching. You've got The Point.